Thank you for inviting me here, and thank you all for hosting me. And I can see there are very many Africans here, so I'll be very careful with how and what I say. But nevertheless, please feel free to contradict me, to dismiss me, but even more, I would like you to praise me. So as we move. Anyway, just a few corrections as we start. And first of all, is that I used to write for the Daily Nation for many years, and I can see my friend of mine I just met here, who's with the Daily Nation. But I left in March this year. A number of us columnists actually left because we thought the Daily Nation had become too close to the state and was using us columnists as a fig leaf for its pro-regime, for otherwise its pro-regime position. So we left, a number of us, 8 of us who left at the same time, and I'm now writing for the Sunday Standard, which at least has got a bit more honesty in the way it presents itself. But that said, let me say again, I am really deeply honored to be here at Cornell. All of us have heard about Cornell and university, and it just seems to be. I never thought I would ever step into Cornell, and even the town of Ithaca just sounds posh and Ithaca. I'm at Ithaca, so I tell my friends I'm going to Ithaca, and they say, "Wow, sounds very civilized little town." Coming to Ithaca. So it's a good name for whoever chose it. It's a very powerful name. But again, let me also say that I don't consider myself really a scholar as much as I consider myself an activist. And so my presentation today will probably not be scholarly as much as it will be activist-like. And it will not be, so I have no quotations from famous writers and distinguished professors like Professor Dullo here. I'll just be words that are coming out that are there. Okay, so I hope you forgive me. So you may not use this for your classes. And if you want to use it for your lessons and exams, please quote me. I'm the author of those words. There's no other professor who has used them. So I know in many classes you have to quote people because they think you cannot have any original thoughts of your own. And maybe so, maybe it's true, but. So I've chosen a very provocative title, very deliberately, and that's whether our elections in Africa civilian coup d'etats. And it's a topic I chose deliberately to provoke thought, to provoke some discussions, and to provoke some thinking, whether in the context of elections that are often stolen, often predetermined, should we not be calling those elections coups and treat them the same way we treat military coups around the world? But of course, it's not that all of Africa is having civilian coups, and there are some reasonable examples of good traditions around elections, and you can name South Africa, which has got basically pretty much good elections. Botswana, Ghana generally has done quite well around elections. Benin has had a history of doing it quite well. Senegal, Tunisia, and most recently, for those of you who followed, the Gambia surprised us, where I think many of us could not believe that Yahya Jammeh would actually say that I have lost, and of course he changed his mind afterwards. But the fact that a man of that nature could say I have lost, and it was amazing. So we don't know whether it's going to be sustainable, what's going to happen. So let me make it clear, it's not all over. But by and large, and as we look across Africa, elections are a reaffirmation of the status quo. We know when we go into elections what the result will be. Not because there's been any good opinion polls or anything, it's because we know that the elections will be stolen. And we have tried in very many parts of Africa to put in as many refinements and very many ways and checks and obstacles to try and stop the stealing. But it seems that our dictators are always a few steps ahead of us and manage to do so. Sometimes they just don't care. Sometimes our leaders just don't care. They just get the result they want, pick up a figure and say, I won by 78%, and we take it or we leave it. And that's what happens. But generally speaking, we know, and for me so the thesis I'm working with is that, we like to call ourselves emerging democracies in Africa. But unless, in my view, and this is my view rather than any other professor's view, my view is that unless a country has had at least 2 changes of power structures, 2 changes of people changing from one party to another, if we don't have that, you really are not a democracy at all. And that therefore begs the question about South Africa and the ANC being in power since 1994. So democracy demands changes of people in power, changes and going, whether it's going back and forth or different others. But democracy demands a sense that when you're in power, you can lose power, and it is okay to lose power. But what we have in many countries in Africa is that power does not change hands, and power remains in the same hands. It is people are handpicked and they continue. So you have the same thing. So as much as many of us think that Tanzania, for example, is quite stable, the fact that power has never changed hands from CCM shows that it's actually quite a fragile state. And in fact, in Zanzibar, for those of you who know, there's a consistent pattern of stealing the election in Zanzibar to favor CCM, even though it's been clear that CCM hasn't got support in Zanzibar and Pemba. Now, that said, I think I've got to say that my interest in elections is a long one. It's a long one and an old one. And it's there because there are few other ways in which we across the world can express ourselves in a manner and in a way to our leadership to show our dissatisfaction and our disaffection with the status quo. So it's an important place. And when we don't have elections that are fair, elections that are free, then we begin to in a sense, attract non-peaceful ways of changing the state. And that always leads to trouble. I mean, I think for those of us of my age who went through seeing the Bush War in Uganda and other places, we know that violence, even though sometimes may look as though it's attractive and easier to do, ends up having a lot more negative implications than not. And I remember having a conversation years ago with Graça Machel of Mozambique, and we were talking about Mozambique and Frelimo and what they had done. And she says she has no regrets about the war of independence in Mozambique, except the fact that once you get into a cycle of violence, then violence becomes the norm and goes down across many people. So she says that, if they had options, they would not have chosen, she would not have been part of the decision to go into the Bush War and fight using violence. In fact, when I was special rapporteur, one of my reports, which I wrote pretty early on in my mandate, was around freedom of assembly and association in the context of elections. And I did that, and I urge you all, if you have not read any of the wonderful, excellent reports that I wrote for the United Nations, please read them. They are wonderful. And they can be found on a website called www.freeassembly.net. You'll find them there are quite a few, and I think they're quite good. They're quite what we're trying to do. What we try and do as special rapporteurs is also advance the normative value and the normative space around some of these rights. So explaining why it was there. And one of the things that I focused on in terms of elections and freedom of assembly and association is that freedom of assembly, human rights are best served when there's freedom. Of course, that's there. But that during election periods, states should actually expand the space for these rights and all rights, because that's a moment of reckoning in any country. So it's really more important, even though they promote rights, it's best to expand that space then. And of course it is because the elections are key to our lives, the key to our dignity, they're key to our well-being. Elections determine for us in Africa, across the world, they determine whether you will get water or electricity or not, because the way we do vote will determine it. And we have in Kenya, for example, saying that you voted for somebody else, so you don't get that development there. You get those who you voted for who did not get power, they can take care of themselves. So they're very important. As this country is seeing as well, that elections matter, and elections matter in terms of human rights, of dignity, of the sense of self that you have within your own country. So as you Americans, those of you who are here, think about where you're going, and you can see that elections make a determination about how you're represented, with all the gerrymandering that's happening in this country and is going on in this country, it makes actually your democracy less than a full democracy as you would have expected. That you see voter suppression going on, people are trying to reduce the number of people who can vote. I think this is the only country I know, by the way, where once you're convicted of a felony, you lose the right to vote. And I find that incredible. You've served your time, you've been punished, you've served your time, and you come out of jail and you can't vote? I mean, at what point, what's the relationship between voting and jail? You're jailed for selling drugs. What the damn is the connection between selling drugs and voting? Unless, of course, this is aimed at it's got a racist component to it, and I think that's something I hope you all Americans can push quite strongly. Now, I am from Kenya, as you heard, and last year we had a very, very long election season that was very tough for those. I don't know whether my friend from Nation was in Kenya that time. It was very long, very tough, very tense, and at the end of it all, very deadly. Now, this is the thing about elections, that the theory of elections is that when people go and vote on a regular basis, they're able to wait and articulate their views until the elections. Therefore, elections should be solving problems. In Kenya, elections simply explode our problems to the open, and we see them there. And then we don't deal with those problems. We wait for the next cycle, and the same thing happens over and over again. Since the history of multipartyism in Kenya, since 1992, Kenya has had only one decent election, which was 2002. Every other election since then has been compromised, has been stolen, and has been basically a coup. 2007, we saw Kibaki. Those of us who followed it, Kibaki, we see elections on the television, results coming, then the television screens go off. At that time, Kibaki is losing by 1 million votes. When the screens come back hours later on, Kibaki is ahead, miraculously. And then they go on and declare him the winner and swear him at night, because they know it was totally illegitimate. It was a stolen vote. There's no doubt about that. There have been people trying to debate it, but I think the jury is now clear on that. That was a stolen election. 2013, again, the same thing happened, where you start seeing trends where the votes are coming in and the trend doesn't change. The margin remains the same. And you have this transmission issue. We learned later that the election body and Kenyatta's party were sharing the same server. So the same server, they procured the same company to provide IT service. So of course, you know what that means. And this person who was running that server is actually a very old classmate of Kenyatta when they were in St. Mary's School, that school seems to be disturbing Kenyans, because a lot of the people stealing money came from St. Mary's School. So if St. Mary's is a bastion of corruption and evil, even though it's a Catholic school, it's really not doing very well. So you see that whole thing of these Kenyans. So that election again was stolen, but there was violence, and there was people killed, by the way. People will tell you that the 2013 elections were peaceful. That's rubbish. There was a lot of people killed, not as many as 2008. And they were killed by the state as opposed to having intercommunal violence. But what the difference between 2013 and 2007 is the fact that we had a new constitution in place, and there was some kind of trust in the institutions that had created under the constitution for us to be able then to solve our problems. But they failed miserably at that point. The Supreme Court especially was a disaster in the way it adjudicated that case. And in hindsight, when you talk to some of the judges, they'll tell you they made a big mistake, and that's created the problem. 2017, again, we had elections. And for the first time now, the Supreme Court decided to do something brave, and they overturned the results. Kenya then becoming the fourth country in the world where the Supreme Court or court has overturned presidential results ever in the world. Courts do not like to overturn results. So, and I think many people have understood that. So by doing it is a big thing. So that they ordered then new elections, which were boycotted. And for those of us in October who were there, we saw Kenyatta being elected with 98% of the vote. 98. In fact, we wondered where the 2%, how come he didn't get the 2%? Because nobody else voted but his people. And even then, they didn't vote, many of them. So why did they come? Where are they coming from? So he is an illegitimate president. And I make that very clear. I do not recognize him as president, and a number of us do not do so. I call him, in all my writings, I refer to him as Mr. Kenyatta, which seems to get him very angry. But I'm happy to do so all the time. I think I'm respectful by calling him Mr. Am I not? But our African leaders, they like being titles. They like the titles. They want to be called His Excellency, Sir this, Professor this, Professor, we like titles. So when you call him Mr., they get very irritated. And sometimes, because I've met him before, I call him Uhuru, and he gets very mad because he doesn't want to be called that. But something is seriously wrong with us and with how things are going. And I'll tell you this, one of the things that will always tell you that an election is going to be stolen is when you look at how the financial issues in the election body are handled. And I can tell you this, every single time we have elections in Kenya, 2007, 2013, 2017, always before the election and immediately after the election, we learned that there were procurement issues, that somebody in the election body has been stealing money through procurement, because the elections are a big body. I mean, Kenyan elections, I think, the second most expensive elections per capita in the world. And so a lot of money is pumped into the election body. And of course, the Americans and the Brits also pump in more, which doesn't help anybody except themselves. But then, so you see all these questions about stealing happening. And I can tell you this, if if an election body is happy to steal money, then it will be happy to steal votes. The logic is the same. You steal money, you'll steal votes. So you're already compromised. And that's been one of the trends we have had here in Kenya. We follow elections across Africa. Zimbabwe this year, was also very fascinating, where where they had an election 7 months after a military coup. And I have some good friends from Zimbabwe. Once somebody asked me, and somebody told me, after the results were announced, is what he can't understand is why people expect, did people expect a regime that has gone into power by force 7 months earlier to relinquish power by voting? How can we also be so stupid? The only 7 months in power, they were so desperate that they basically had a military coup, and they went in and took power. And then we expect them to just give up to somebody else like that in 7 months. It doesn't happen. So, but the fact that Zimbabwe could have a charade of elections, the fact that international people went to Zimbabwe, everybody knowing there is no way Mnangagwa is going to come out. I mean, he wasn't as brazen as Museveni. Museveni basically says, whether you vote me in or not, I am not leaving. He just tells you in advance, we'll vote, but I'm not leaving. And he knows, and he says that very obviously. So again, it's something we have to think about very carefully about that, because in fact, in Uganda, I happened to observe some elections in Uganda, just 2 days before the election day, you start seeing military trucks roving around. Yeah, these big trucks with long guns, just moving around, driving around, and they go and park up on top of the hills of Kampala and just stay there, and they're smiling, and everybody knows what it means. Dare you, it is telling us, dare you, and he's not going to leave at all. In Rwanda, we have a situation where my friend Mr. Kagame gets 97% of the vote, and he thinks it's fine. It's a reflection of the reality of his popular support. In Ethiopia, as you saw last when they had their parliamentary elections, the ruling party PDRF got 100% of all the seats. Every seat was taken by the ruling party. Now, how? I believe people can be popular. Absolutely, I think people can be popular, but 100%, it just doesn't happen. Burundi just beats up people and doesn't allow you to go and vote, and intimidates people and beats them up. Nigeria has had, I think, one election that we can say has been good. Togo will never let go. DRC, Zambia, we have got the problems now, and the professor was telling me during lunch that even after the election where the president was announced with 100,000 more votes, and the last place to announce was the capital, I think, Professor, you said the capital, Lusaka, which is where the election body is based. So the whole country announces their results, and then they wait to see how many do we need to steal by. And once they decide, okay, we need this, let's now announce Lusaka. And then, of course, and the court then makes so it just goes on and on and on. I mean, so what I'm just saying is that it's a pattern. I'm trying to draw a pattern to show you that in very many parts of Africa, this is a trend. It's not an anomaly, it's a trend, and you can go back and forth. But let's be clear, it's not just African. So before you all think that only Africans are stealing elections. In Azerbaijan in 2013, when I was special rapporteur, in fact, I include that in my report, 2013 Azerbaijan, some results were published the day before they went to vote by the election commission. They didn't vote. They said 74% for the president, I think 5% for the leading opposition leader or something like that. That's what, 7% for the leading opposition leader. And then they said, oh, sorry, it's a mistake. We're just doing a trial run. We don't want to see. Then they went to vote, and the results came out officially. The president had 84%, and the leader of opposition had gone down. So, but you see, they had already determined. It was in the system. It was in software. It was just ready to release. Didn't matter how you voted, just went to release. And it continues the same way. I mean, results. This is it's like a game. We see it in Russia. We see it in China, which doesn't even bother to vote. Kazakhstan. Armenia tried that. So it's not a trend. I'm just basically trying to tell you, it's not this stealing of elections is not an African thing alone, but it's a global trend where we are now using elections to legitimize and maintain dictatorships. And that's the bigger question, really, is that we have allowed civilian coups to be normal. And it's not just in Africa, but I will keep my presentation on Africa. So what is happening? Why are we doing this across Africa? Now, for those, again, those of us who are a little older, who remember Africa before multi-partyism, elections were, those who had elections knew it was for the parliamentary system, for the parliamentary seats alone. The president could never be opposed. He could never be opposed. You did not do that. The president was, as we said in Kenya, is farmer number one, teacher number one, architect number one, doctor number one, driver number one. I mean, he was everything. He was the best at everything. Husband number one, father number three, father number one. He was everything. He was every title. So there was no challenge to the presidency then. But with the reintroduction of multi-partyism, then there was a huge spate of now having elections. And there was a lot of interest, and there continues to be a lot of interest and turnout in Africa, that even though we know, and as we go into, we know they will be stolen, but we still go. We still go and vote, and we still go out and try, and maybe we'll be lucky this time. Maybe they'll make a mistake, but we keep doing it. They've never seen that before. So what's happened in Africa is that then these authoritarian regimes have learned that, you can maintain international legitimacy by having these charades. People say, fine, we'll now take you in. We will not give you the same treatment as they would do if you had a military coup, because there's been a shift in the world away from military coups that had been there before. So many of us, again, who remember 60s and 70s, coups were very, very common. And so they've moved away from that now, and they're saying we are going to get legitimacy by going through the motions of having elections. Now, I'm not, now given the way the world is today, I really not sure how long this charade will continue. Because today you don't really need to have elections. Trump doesn't care. UK is confused about itself. France just doesn't know where it's going. It doesn't matter anymore. Because, as they've been stealing elections, we in the countries have known they're stealing. We have known. It is really a charade for the international community to say, look, they have passed the grade. I'm not sure how long they will continue with this charade, because we spend so much time and so much money. In fact, I don't know why we are doing it when we don't need to do it. So the question is, why do we maintain this? And why does the international community seem to be so keen to maintain this charade? I know that in Kenya, the issue of calm and peace is vital. Is vital. And especially after 2007, 2008, I think very many people were shocked by that violence in Kenya. I don't know why they were shocked, because the signs were clear that this was bound to happen. In fact, I did a television interview in 2006 before the election and said the way these guys are going and the way things are happening, we will have violence during the elections, because it's rational, it's logical the way they are going. So it's because elections no more the international community is no longer interested in a fair decision. They're interested now in maintaining peace. And in fact, if you notice, every international observation of any election in Africa starts off with the election day went by peacefully. The first sentence, it was a peaceful election. So we have now decided that peace is the reason why we vote, as opposed to voting for something much more deeper than peace. Peace is important, but peace on its own without justice is not peace. It's a facade, and it will go, which is why it went in Kenya in 2007. So it's fascinating for me when I see this. And interestingly as well, is that in many of these observation reports, there seems to be a refusal, because I think it's deliberate refusal, to say that state violence is violence. They seem to think that violence is only when the Kalenjin are killing or being killed by the Bukusu, then that is now violence. That is something we have to stop. But when the state is killing people, it is not seen to be seen as violence. And actually across the history of all of Africa, I guarantee you this, the state is the major killer of people. It's not people among themselves. The state is the killer. And it seems to get away with it all the time when it does that. So I keep wondering why this is going on and why we don't see that. In fact, I'll tell you this, because I remember, and there's an acceptance. In 2017, I was invited for dinner by one of the ambassadors, and in there was a group of people. And so in Kenya, just before the elections, there was an assassination of somebody called Chris Msando. So those Kenyans I know here will know who he was. Chris Msando was in charge of the IT department at the election body. And he had been out in the press very strongly saying, we are not allowing any interference. I can guarantee you, I'm not going to allow it. I'm not going to stop it. So there was pressure on him to manipulate the system. But apparently he was resisting. So he was killed, assassinated very brutally, about 3 weeks before the election. and in a very brutal way. And in the classic Kenyan style, by the way, when somebody is assassinated, the first thing the police come out with is what they call a love triangle. The reason was there a love triangle here. Every single time I can get, so every time if you follow Kenyan news, if you see somebody somewhere in sensitive position is killed, I guarantee you they will say, is there a love triangle? And the media, our fascinating media, just touts it out. No questions asked. The police have said love triangle, therefore it's love triangle. And so they're actually reducing us to very, very low levels. And I think the media, and my friend there will have a case to answer, I hope. There's something that's really, really wrong about how we are doing things, because it just can't be that every killing is a love triangle, So anyway, after he was assassinated, I was having this dinner. And this guy, so we're talking about Chris Msando and what we expect. And one of the people there, who's a diplomat, said to me that, now that Chris Msando has been assassinated, we know that the election will be stolen. But you know what? We are good. We are good with it. We are okay with it. Because as long as Kenyatta comes back, we are okay. And that's exactly what happened. So there is an acceptance of that. And I think the idea of stability and calm is very important. If you look at Uganda, Rwanda, and Ethiopia, I think the reasons why they get away with it is because they have made themselves to be indispensable regimes to the international community by peacekeeping. In case of Rwanda, I think you may have seen how when the UN tried to write a report about Rwanda, and Mr. Kagame said, okay, if you think we don't protect human rights, we are pulling out our troops, people from Darfur. And immediately Ban Ki-moon flew and went on bended knee to Kagame and said, we are very sorry. We need your people in Darfur. And that was the end of that report. Same thing with Ethiopia now and Uganda with Somalia and the war on terror, which is big. They're indispensable with that, so they can almost do anything they want. And Kenya learned that lesson and decided they're going to do the same thing, which is why one of the reasons why Kenya invaded Somalia some years ago, and they're not doing very much except smuggling the charcoal and sugar from Somalia and selling guns to Al-Shabaab every so often. So it's a whole mess about what's going on there. But what is done is that it's made these countries now indispensable to the international community in certain ways. Now the why as well, you've got to ask that, I think one of the problems is that as the Cold War ended and as countries moved into multipartyism, the West, for some reason, became enamored with the idea that elections are the sign of democracy. And they forgot or didn't really care that the structures of these countries, even though they are now having competitive elections, were still one-party structures. They were still military-like structures. So you can have an election there, but nothing has changed elsewhere. It is meaningless. It's meaningless. So we made a mistake at that point, and I think and so they equated elections with democracy, which is very dangerous. Now, I keep asking myself, why is this? Because I know the West has got some very smart people. People have gone to schools like Cornell and they are advising the presidents and state departments. Why is it they're making this? Is it because of naivety that they think that we can cope with these things? Or is it the fact that they think that we don't deserve real freedom in Africa? They think that for us, anything just seeming that looks like it is enough. Is it that they fear that if we decide to take control of our nations properly, that we may turn against the West? And there's so many questions around what it means. So in a sense, it's really, for me, the end of the Cold War reiterated very much the sense that we got in the 60s in Africa, which is that we got independence without freedom. And we got that's what really what we got. We got independence without freedom, and many countries simply replaced white faces for black faces. And so it's minority rule. Even today in Kenya, it's minority rule, and has been minority rule depending on who's there. So we have a clique today of Kikuyu or Kikuyu elite running. I'm not sure. I'm not going to call it the Kiambu Mafia, because not even Kiambu, St. Mary's Mafia, I want to say, who are running the country and messing us up completely. Before that was the Mount Kenya Mafia, and then there was the Kalenjin Mafia. So everybody, just small groups, it's minority governments. It's basically colonial structures repeated in different ways, but same people, just that our colors have changed, but our mentalities have not. And it's a question we have to keep asking ourselves. So is it useful to have independence without freedom? It's a question we need to ask. And that's a thing that I think I think we need to look at. So which is why, in my view, and I think it's in time for us now to start being quite clear and naming it for what it is, that any actions, whatever it's elections, whatever it is, that affects the will of the people and makes us less respectful of structures and systems is really a coup d'etat. And we should call that now, rather than play around with words like rigging or manipulated or elections were stolen, votes were stolen. No, it's a coup. It's a coup. So Kenyatta is in power by a coup. It's a coup. Museveni is in power by a coup. I was in Uganda some time ago this year, and we were talking about Uganda, and I was speaking, and I said to Ugandans, we have to start naming Ugandans. You have to start naming and get rid of the fear. So here you understand that, yes, Museveni is a problem. He's not the only one. But it is clear that nothing will happen in Uganda unless Museveni is there. So I want you to repeat after me, I said. Okay, are you ready? Yes. I said, Museveni must go. Total silence from Ugandans. Total silence. Museveni must go. So there was total silence. So, it's something that people don't like saying. But I think we have to say, Kenyatta must go. Museveni must go. All these dictators must go. Otherwise, and once you start churning it out in your head and your mind, these things do happen. So another thing we've got to ask ourselves, which always surprises me, which always surprises me around this, is that for some reason, because if we accept that our and I don't understand this, our dictators know that they can stay in power anyway, and so they manipulate elections. They know we don't want them to be in office, but they continue. So I keep asking myself, why is it they're insisting on doing these charades? Why do they do so? And clearly the question of international legitimacy is important to them. And I'm not sure why, because then, and I suppose in the days of Idi Amin, those of us who remember, and all the coups in West Africa happening, coup after coup, and when Samuel Doe was there in Liberia and all those people, there was a coup after coup after coup. But within the African context, there was a sense of, it doesn't matter how you come to power, as long as you come to power, you are one of us, we'll continue with you. It changed at some point, and so much, especially so in West Africa, as we saw with ECOWAS and Gambia, and we've seen that ECOWAS actually flexing its muscles and saying, we won't let you sustain a coup. Although I don't think I always wonder whether ECOWAS would attack Nigeria if there's a coup. Would they? How would they deal with that? Or Senegal, for that matter, that are strong. But I think there's a sense where all these strong men that are in power really they care about international perception. I think they care that if they go somewhere, they cannot be invited to a university like this or other places to speak because people might challenge them and they may not have enough answers around it. And we saw the coup in Zimbabwe that happened, where they have a total coup. It's a total coup, but they will not call it a coup. The military will not call it a coup because something is going to happen. Maybe the Southern African Development Cooperation Unit will stop them and say no. So they actually force Mugabe to write a letter of resignation. Then they say, okay, he's resigned. Therefore, now we can go on. But it's a coup by whichever way you look at it. But there's something that's happened there that we can't understand. Now, whatever we do has to be domestically driven. Domestic changes in these countries cannot be driven like some were in the Cold War by the West and by Russia, where they would engineer coup after coup. It cannot be done that way anymore. It's got to be us locals doing whatever it is we want to do. We would not mind international support, and I think that's where we keep asking in terms of what can it be, what kind of support can that be? I think one of the first things for me is that we need to start really questioning and finding ways in which we all who are scholars here perhaps can think of ways in which you can present options about how we move away from the winner-take-all systems that we have in many parts of Africa. That is really a big problem. The winner-take-all, sometimes first past the post, which the British, in the context of Anglophone Africa, bequeathed on us. So even if you have an election and you win 50.0001, then you start ruling as though you are ruling over 100. People got support 100%. You didn't do that. And because we are divided, because we are polarized, because we do have all these divisions among us, we really need to find a system to ask ourselves, how do we move? I think we all know in Africa, we know how to do it. We know that the winner-take-all system is bad. And we probably know how we can what should come in its place. But how you move from a winner-take-all to another system is something that would be useful if we could get some scholarship on and to see how that works. I think we've got to focus a lot on election management bodies. They call them EMBs around there. How do we create some, and how do we move so that they are impartial and fair? Now in Kenya we've tried different tactics sometimes. So we like to, now even the name of the election management body even has the title independent, as though by putting independent is going to be independent. So it's called Independent Elections and Boundaries Commission. But I tell you that independent means something totally different. It's not independent at all. It is controlled by the regime in power as is there. We have tried, is it a balanced system that works, having an elections body that has got make sure it's created with people who actively represent different political formations. So it's balanced as opposed to being independent. There are ways in which how do we take the Nigerian approach, which says there's one election body per election. You do one election, you get out. So you mess up, you never mess up again. You do good, thank you, bye too. But maybe that's the way to work in these polarized countries. And so Nigeria's is an interesting design of one election, one election commissioner, one election. That's it, only one. Because maybe it's a good idea, but it's something we need to start thinking about and finding scholarship around that. I think, especially around the international observers, we really need to think about that. And the late Kofi Annan was actually working on this idea of how can the international observers either be more useful or get out? Because actually when they come into a country and say, we think it was reasonably fair, it is nothing more painful as that. And the African Union, very sadly in our case, I think has never ever said an election was compromised. Never. The African Union observers have never seen a stolen election, ever. And they go to every election in Africa, every election they go. And every election is fine and fantastic and reflects the will of the people, no matter what happens. So it's something to ask ourselves, what should we be working now to find another template or another means which the international observation system becomes fairer and looks at the situation before, during, and after, and doesn't focus on peace alone, because it doesn't work. Because the guidelines that these observer missions use are really from the late 1980s, early 1990s. They haven't changed since then, although the world has changed. So they focus very much on the day itself, rather than looking through the whole process. Was it fair? Was it not fair? And they also, the other interesting thing is that very often they're watching for ballot stuffing. Are the ballots being stuffed, But elections are moved. Nowadays you don't need to stuff. Just wait at the transmission of results. People can do what they want. Whoever is transmitting, that's the point that becomes very complicated. So votes are changed between transmission just by computers and software. That's where things are happening and being changed. So we have to figure that out. And the other thing as well, which we have been trying to push, a few of us some time ago, is that maybe it's time for us to raise the cost of stealing elections. It is right now, you steal elections, you are rewarded. Kibaki stole in Kenya in 2007, and he was rewarded with the presidency, legitimacy, and the government of national unity. Mugabe stole in 2008, got presidency, legitimacy, government of national unity. Uhuru Kenyatta stole in 2017, and now he's given the handshake to Raila Odinga, and things are calm. So there's all this thing where we are rewarding theft, and we have to find a way to punish it and maybe elevate the theft of elections to the same level as we treat coups, as we treat crimes against humanity, as we treat all these dangerous things, because they inevitably lead to crimes against humanity in some form. And we just got to find a way to elevate that in another place. The last thing I think we should do is that we could look at reducing the size of the prize. And that means the prize for power in Africa is massive. The state is yours. You take anything you want whenever you want it. So you go now, we're going to China. We go and ask for loans and tell the Chinese, we would like a loan for $4 billion. Chinese say, for what? You say, we want to build a railway. He says, that costs $2 billion. He says, don't matter, we want 4. He says, yeah, fine, take the 4. So we take the 4. We build a railway, we call it SGR, which really costs about $1.5, $2 billion. The other money goes somebody's pocket. And then now we have to pay for that money. Because when you're president, this is what you can do. The state is yours. And I wrote my column saying, the other day, saying that it's fascinating for me, because Even we give salaries to these leaders, and I'm wondering, our presidents, they get salaries. You know, these guys spend zero. They have no expenses. We buy their food, we buy their water, we give them transport, we pay their school fees for their children, we pay electricity. Why are they taking a salary for? For what reason? If they want, we buy their clothes. They have no use of any money. We pay for them. We buy Kenyatta's underwear. We buy it. Sorry? We pay for them. So the question: why do you take a salary then when you have all these things there? So I mean, the size of the what I'm trying to say though, as I'm joking, the state is the wallet, is the ATM of the president. It is his ATM. Take any money. Kenya went to the markets a year and a half ago, and they floated this Eurobond in Ireland at the Irish Stock Exchange. We were hoping to raise $2 billion, which is supposed to be help for capital developments and so money that could be used. So we raised 2.5, so much to the surprise of everybody. It was really well taken by investors. When the money comes in, we can see 600 million going to pay debt. That's a legitimate. There was commercial debt that the government had taken. We can see it going. That's 600 million. We can see about $1 billion coming into the coffers of the state in Nairobi. $1 billion has disappeared. It just disappeared. We can't trace it. It cannot. And when you ask Treasury, they say, no, the way it went is a secret account of the government. We can't let you know. Since when did government accounts become secret? It's our money. It's our money. And the responsibility of that Eurobond rests with Uhuru Kenyatta. I can bet you today, Uhuru Kenyatta is responsible for that $1 billion theft. It disappeared. 1 billion. We can't trace it. So the state is the wallet, is the ATM of these guys. That's why the price is too big. So we've got to make sure now that we reduce this wallet. This ATM must be made poorer and poorer so they can't get into it. I know it sounds very Republican saying reduce the size of the state, but it really has to be in the context of Kenya in terms of where it goes. And I think one of the things we have to try and do is devolve power more and more. The presidency cannot be everything. It's got to be reduced. And to some extent, many countries are doing it. Uganda has resisted it and will resist for a long time, and plus others. I think one of the things we should try and do is change the way taxation is done. And taxes should be collected now from the bottom, and then they should give it back to the central government when they need it. So you have a program that gives to the central government, as opposed today, even if you have devolved system, the money comes to the federal government or the top level and then goes to the states. In Nigeria, that's how it goes. Should be the reverse. The people should collect the money from the bottom and give to the central government at the top and see where that works. Make it poorer. Make sure that the price of being president isn't as lucrative as it is now. And of course, one last thing we need to do is term limits and age limits. Those term limits, because there's nothing else you got to do. You got to have term limits, and I'm happy to say that I have been observing term limits all my life, happily so, because you do get tired actually of doing anything that you do. But then the more important part is then we saw this in Uganda with when they had the debate about age limits. So having the debate about age limits, not only have members of parliament been bribed like crazy by Museveni, but as they're voting, then soldiers start coming in to the chambers as MPs are voting, and they're all armed and ready. So what do you call that? Is that not a coup? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So from your theory, most of the leaders in the African countries are illegitimate because they came to power through electoral coup. If that is the case, the UN General Assembly is full of a lot of illegitimate leaders. What then would you make out of the decisions being made in the UN General Assembly if it's made up of a large number of illegitimate leaders? Decisions.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think we should have around a few more questions, comments. Yes.
Thank you very much for a really down-to-earth, very clear talk on elections in Africa. My take is that as a political economist, that we are going through a phase of primitive accumulation of capital. Meaning, if we look at colonialism as primitive accumulation, with slavery, grabbing of land, etc., the independence phase was also primitive accumulation. Like you said, we just changed from white faces to black faces, in a sense that the process was continuing. And what we have to see is how to move from primitive accumulation to rational accumulation, because the economy will transform the politics. Once we end primitive accumulation, take serious punitive action, which is like fighting corruption, then it will automatically have an impact on politics and also on social activities, meaning issues of integrity and morality and all of that. It is, we have to maybe look at historical examples to see how some of the countries ended primitive accumulation, meaning grabbing of land, grabbing of property. It is, the solution might be there rather than looking at just the superstructure, the elections, the politics. We might, and I see a sign that some of the people who participated in primitive accumulation in 60s, 70s are now ready for the society to end that. Their recent struggle in Kenya against corruption and so on is basically the old money wants to end the new thieves from stealing. And secondly, in terms of the party systems, we don't have any difference between the NASA and the Jubilee. Both, it is what our friend John Githongo talked about, my turn to eat, or it's our turn to eat. And this is seen very clearly in some of the counties where NASA won. They are as corrupt as the central government. And this goes down to all the, even particularly in Nyanza. I'm from Nyanza, I'm from Kisumu. And we see the nature of the ODM run counties is no different from, and I'm very disappointed with that. I was hoping that they could show some change, but so that's why I go back to this. It is primitive accumulation. And Nyanza never got the chance to primitively accumulate. This is the first time they are having an opportunity in the NASA and in the so-called opposition zones, which they took over. And it's no different from the central. So that's why I said we should look at the economy rather.
Okay. So maybe we'll give you a chance to answer, and then we'll come back to you.
You've asked a very good question about legitimacy of the UN. You know, in the when UN was founded in 40s, going on, the countries that were running it were Britain and France, which were colonial states, which were oppressing people. Remember, apartheid South Africa was one of the founders of the United Nations. So that question of legitimacy has always been there. And in the US itself was brutalizing its own people like crazy here in America. The Soviet Union is a colonial. Is a colonial project, a Soviet Union. So I suppose the question is a good question to ask in terms of what does it mean when you have a body where the states come in that are made up of illegitimate leaders. Now, the theory of law, and maybe the professor can clarify here. The theory of law is that states are the ones that are members as opposed to governments and regimes. So one's a state rather than the government. So that then creates more of the legitimacy part of it. So it tries to insulate, in a sense, international law from the illegitimacy of of the people there. So when Idi Amin or Babangida and Abacha were signing international agreements, or signing as Nigeria as opposed to being military governments, that then makes a difference in terms of that, in a sense. So I think that's the one I would say in the international law. That's how I would distinguish them. But I think it's more the fact that outside of the UN is the way people are treated. When you don't have international legitimacy, one of the things you cannot do is travel easily. Yes, you'll come to the UN General Assembly in New York, but that's about where you'll go. Because once they stop traveling. You're stopped from traveling in. And one of the most powerful tools that exist up to today is visa bans. I can tell you for a fact, I've seen people crying. I know a friend of mine, one of the St. Mary's people. He's not somebody I know. Not used to be a friend of mine. You're no longer friends. His son was studying in the US, and he's got a visa ban, and so he wanted to come. So this is a man. We've had terrible fights at some point. Terrible fights because he was pro-corruption and we were fighting each other. But he came to me and says, "I want to talk to you." So he took me out to dinner, very expensive dinner. He says, "Can you help me with the Americans?" I said, "Why?" "I'm not allowed to go, and my son is graduating, and I want to go." I said, "You go and ask the Americans yourself. Me, I'm not American. You go and ask them. You know what you did." But they actually hurts them. I mean, some people even argue that one of the reasons Mobutu was died out from prostate cancer is because he couldn't travel to Belgium and Switzerland to get treatment. So it is a very powerful thing. So illegitimacy should have consequences that are in that form. And by the way, when people do visa bans, I wish they would do it for the family, the grandchildren, the cousins, the uncles, do the whole clan. So it becomes painful because they'll say, "I can't go now to America because of you. It's your fault. So go and do the right thing." It makes more sense that way. But I think that's where it goes. In terms of I think the question of whether primitive accumulation is clearly the problem. We're just accumulating. I would hesitate before to say that the old money, Kenyan context, old money is fighting corruption. Kenyatta is not fighting corruption. Kenyatta is trying to reduce the numbers of people stealing so he can steal more. So he's reducing them. He wants to put them in jail, and I think there's a bigger thing because there's some things he cannot do. He is so intricately involved in the corruption that's happened. NYS1, Eurobond, SGR. It is his hands that he can't fight it. His deputy is known in Kenya as the one who picks every pocket in the country. Every single deal, Ruto is there, as we know. As Kenyans, Ruto is everywhere. Is that not true? Yeah, everywhere. So everything, you name it, whether it's true or not, we think Ruto is involved in every deal that happens. But the point is they are so dirty themselves, they can't really move it. But so they are not the ones who will finish. But I agree with you in the sense that if we did fight corruption and fight it well and make sure there's a restitution and reparations for that theft that's happened, the country will be better. At this point, people know there's not much of a price to pay. The fact that the governor of Migori is in court for murder and now they're going for him for corruption is really a factor of Kenyatta's opinion, in my view, that he doesn't like devolution, he doesn't like counties because they have money that he can't control. And he doesn't like the idea they have to give 40% or 30% of the budget to the counties. He doesn't like that. So if you can weaken that, that's fine. But yes, you're right. People are accumulating. And I think that at some point that should be fought. But whether that will influence our politics in a good way, I'm not sure. I mean, I think, we have had this debate for many years about institutions versus people, or how do you get that? So we tried in Kenya with a constitution, for more than 20 years we fought for a constitution, and we succeeded in 2010 because of the deaths that happened and the killings that happened in 2008. People are ready now for a new constitution. So we've got a pretty good constitution, but we can't seem to make it work. And that's because the people who are in charge of implementing it, Ruto and Kenyatta, really don't like it. So they're undermining it over and over again. So the question is, and then we have this something. I'm not sure what's going to move our policies, not just in Kenya but across the world, across Africa. What will it take for us to get those leaders who care? And I think maybe we need to learn something from Botswana about how come they seem to be generating over and over leaders that are not taking everything. They're leaving something. If they're taking, they leave a lot. They leave a lot behind. What is it with us that in Uganda? One of my favorite phrases is Museveni says, "My oil." It's not Uganda's oil. My oil will believe it is his mind, So what is it that primitive accumulation, and what is it? And I don't understand, because they do all that and then come and get praised and get awards and other things from the West. So something that we have to think about. And yes, absolutely, in Kenya, the opposition is very much like the ruling party, and partly is because they have open door policies. So even if you look at the manifestos of Jubilee versus NASA, for example, with the last election, they're very different, by the way. For the first time, there's a clear ideological difference between the leading parties on paper. But when NASA decides anybody can come, so you are just had a fight with Kenyatta, you now come and become opposition. So that's the only reason. Then you go ahead and win. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of making our parties better and stronger. And people are looking for numbers as opposed to other things. So yes, indeed, there is a real problem in terms of that. But the value system is something. In fact, what I'd like you guys who are here, who are scholars, is to give us and study for us and give us a sense, is when nations and countries have lost their soul, have lost their moral values, when young people growing up and old people existing believe that the only thing you have to do is make money, whichever way you make money. When your heroes are thieves and crooks and killers within social media, that's what you value. How do you turn that? Where has that been turned around to in a different way? And I've been searching my head. In fact, the reason I went to Denmark was trying to understand why are the Danes so trusting? Why are they so honest? Why are the Finns so honest? It's not something that DNA. They are crooks even at one point, I assumed. But then I learned that the Danes are different because they've had a long history of trust and respect within their culture, different. So it was not a very useful study at that point. But I'd like to understand where that happens and how people have done to reverse bad value systems, and how do you do that? Be a useful study.
Yes, I don't think I can disagree with anything you've said, but my feeling was perhaps we need to make the picture a little more grey, because there are some countries where the electoral process is not as meaningless, of course. Think of Namibia, Botswana, Ghana, even Sierra Leone, surprisingly, if you look at the elections. And that's one thing. And the other one is that I think we have no choice. We have to go through this, because each time you have even a stolen election, I think that's a learning, it's a lesson for the civil society and the people. They know it. And you get a lot of absurdities, explanations that you're saying, but people see through that. And this might be strange coming from somebody from Uganda, which is going very quickly down towards a catastrophe. And so I just checked the news, and there were reports of actually pictures. I saw pictures of the police army clabbing people. And apparently the government says, well, this was a photocopied picture from Nigeria. And they expect Nigerians to say something about it. But the ordinary person knows the absurdity of what's going on. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think we still have to do it through the electoral process. But each time, perhaps, the civil society is going to begin to rise. And I see this happening, actually, not just in Uganda, I think the young generation. So I feel like we should throw in a more optimistic cast like these maps here, some light.
Yes, you had a hand up, and then over here, isn't it? Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, and then how many more people? Okay. One. So, okay, since we're so many, try to be brief, and then we can go. Everybody, yes, please.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. So you talked about many African countries having gained independence but not freedom. And so I would like to know what you take from freedom. What do you think freedom is? And I ask that question because there'll be many scenarios where different African countries, let's say for example Rwanda. I'm from Rwanda, and so people are there's change. There's some change happening in Rwanda. People are getting free healthcare, free education, and I would define that as freedom. Development, I would say development is freedom. And let's say in Senegal, there are very many parties, very many presidents running, but they're not getting as many benefits as people in Rwanda are getting. So some people might define freedom as development, and others might define freedom as seeing very, very many faces on the ballot boxes, and that doesn't have the same importance. So I would like to know, like, where do we draw the line on giving so much importance to multipartyism and what freedom is in that sense?
Good question.
Okay, yes, we have three here, we have one hand here, quickly, and then over there, we take, yeah.
Just
Thank
have
you.
one word on this. And is freedom from the inside or from the outside, from the international system? Because you said that these say, persons make themselves indispensable for the international system. So I wonder whether that is related. Sorry.
So, yes,
Yes, my concern is about technology advancement. Do you think it's going to reduce on these issues of the elections and the corruption and such? And also, how about like free education systems for the communities? Are they really coming to make up minds and change things around?
okay. So I think we'll go to the next one because you have like four, so maybe you need to respond to that.
Okay.
And then you be the next year over there.
Professor, I'm a total optimist. I'm a total optimist. That's why I do the work I do in human rights. Otherwise, I would have given up and closed shop a long time ago. I am optimistic because we don't give up. But what I was trying to do was paint a picture that people to see that if we don't get our act together, we may well return to the days of coups and wars and bush wars and stuff. And it's important we get this right. So yes, I'm very optimistic. And to your point about the grey side, actually, I started off with that caveat saying that there are countries that do well on elections. So I hope I maybe I wasn't clear enough when I said it, but I am quite optimistic. I think that Africa, and in fact what's going on in Uganda now with the utterly unexpected response to Bobby Wine's beating and arrest in Arua is fundamental, is a fantastic thing. And it's those kinds of actions actually that will lead to change, as opposed to for us waiting for elections, then we start agitating. We've got to agitate between elections as opposed to during elections only. On the question of what is freedom, and thank you for that question from Rwanda. I think it's I think for those of us who are a little older and remember, Africa in the 60s was asked, essentially made a choice. We were told either we go to one party state, and therefore we get development, or we go to multipartyism and no development. It's not accidental that Africa, and then at the end of the day, we got neither development nor did we get freedom. We lost out. And the Rwanda model is not new. It's been tried in Tanzania, tried in Uganda, tried in Kenya, tried all over Africa, Nigeria, Ghana. They tried that model of development as freedom. But I think there's good writings by people like Amartya Sen, who talks about development as freedom. And I would encourage you to look at it that says it's not just one thing. And the challenge should not be development versus freedom. It's not either or. You can have them both. And for us to exercise our dignity as people, we need both the intellectual freedom to think as we want to think, to vote as we want to vote, to be free from torture, to be free from being killed at random, even if you're in South Africa and you've been opposing the state. You want to be free from being jailed because you've said something. That's what you want to have, as well as the development. You want to have healthcare. You want to have good roads. And there's no doubt that Rwanda has done fabulously well in moving that development agenda. But at what cost and what price has it done that? And how sustainable is it? Because we have got to ask ourselves again, when the Arab awakenings happened in Tunisia, Tunisia had ticked off every box of the Millennium Development Goals, every box. As soon as that uprising happened, it's gone down, missed everything, all of it. Okay. So it's not sustainable. So I think Rwanda's got the challenge where it's built up a foundation of development to start figuring out how to give people their intellectual freedom as they move ahead. How do you move with that? How do you get the right to a fair trial? How do you ensure that you can compete equally for a position? And I know the position, I know the difficulties of Rwanda. And I think Rwanda is a very, very complex and very difficult situation. But I think that Rwanda is not going to be sustainable if it goes on the way it is going. I think Mr. Kagame has had chances to figure out how to do things and make that country much more united. And I know it's not easy after going through genocide. And I think all of us we can all pontificate about it theoretically. But I think if you live through it's a different thing altogether. But I think it's not an easy place or necessarily a good place to be when you don't know what's going to happen and whether you've solved those issues around that created the grounds for genocide. And what you don't want to do is hope that the government in place is perhaps inadvertently creating that same mood for what happened before, inadvertently. I think that's a bigger challenge you have, which is where, for me, that space to articulate, that space to debate, that space to argue peacefully is probably more important than closing it down and saying that let's close it down, and we force you to do something. Not necessarily work. Okay? On the technology, the question could be, it could be, it could not be. In the last Kenyan elections, we learned that Cambridge Analytica was advising Jubilee, and maybe that's why the transmission things were stolen through technology than it was before. So it's both it's a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged knife. One side may help, one side, but I think it's the truth of the matter is that it's the world is moving. Now, a lot of my friends who are involved in the technical aspects of elections keep saying that we be careful about technology because it's actually easier to manipulate than other things. Remember, the Dutch got so worried about a year ago about possible Russian interference in the election. They stopped all technology and went back to paper and pen, saying that's safer. We can count it. We know where it is. So I don't know where it's going to happen. Because software and technology can be hacked and you lose control and you don't know what's happening. So some people think paper and pen is better. Our experience in Africa shows that paper and pen is easier is also available to be stolen. So we just have a problem of trust, which we have to solve and figure out what to do. But on education, absolutely. We have got to keep educating people. We've got to keep and not educating people to mimic and to repeat and to memorize. We need people to be critical, analytical thought, which is why I think some people, those of you who are here now in the US, are benefiting from a different sort of education than you get necessarily in Africa, because here you at least I hope you're being challenged and you're asking questions and you're critical and you're thinking about the why does that happen, as opposed to just knowing the law. I had a professor of law who tell me in law of evidence, which tell us, I don't care what you think, just give me the law. Give me the law. Give me the law. And for those of you who know Kenya a bit, you say, give me the law. The law. Yeah.
So, okay, we have, so yes, the back there, and then, so we have like 4 people there, I think.
So my
So,
original question was actually to the 101. Basically, the idea of if there's such a thing as having economic efficacy, having a regime that's economically effective, and at the same time is a one-party regime or is doubtful in different ways. And this is especially in the case of regimes where within the country we may know that this is just business as usual, but internationally there's a certain respect for this new regime and it invites investment, it invites partnership, etc. And listening to what you just said about how there needs to be both development and freedom, I'm thinking, where along that spectrum does the election come in? Is it the first step, like the democratic election? Is it the first step in the process of having this development and freedom? Or is it that we need to do something before in terms of development or in terms of freedom? And the election process is the pinnacle of showing something that has happened internally and for many years. So it's basically what needs to happen before the election, or is that the election is the first thing?
okay. Yes, please. You have 3 people here. Let's take on. Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, I'll come after. Since I'm well appointed, I'll make sure. Oh, okay. So, okay, please be brief. The time is kind of running out. So, and then quickly, all of you here, and then
Hi, Mwalimu, my question.
so the professor can wait until you.
Mwalimu, my question is about the best system in Kenya. We found that most of the rulers in Kenya come from the bigger ethnic groups. In Tanzania, it's the other way, to come from smaller ethnic groups. So it means that Kenya will be having the good and challenging for the rest of our lives. So what's the best system that elections can have that we will have people from other ethnic groups that can do also? Because we found that it's always that it's our time to eat.
Okay. Yes, please. And Tony.
I'm all right.
No, I'm coming to the professor. Don't worry. I'll protect you.
Thank you, Dr. Kiai. My question is...
No, I'm not a doctor. And let me say that quickly, because those Kenyans know how Kenyans people now are giving themselves titles. Yeah. So we have now Professor what's the name of that guy who Mutahi Guni? He's never gone to anybody's PhD in his life, but now he's professor. Then there's other guy. So people give. I don't want to be given. I'm just Mister. I'm happy. I'm happy there. I'm very happy.
Thank you, Mr. Kiai.
I'm very happy.
My question is that despite the fact that a lot of people see and you can tell in the news that these elections are being stolen, there's some sort of pride in the ability to participate and continue to vote in elections regardless of the outcome. Why do you think that is, and where do you think that's going?
So, just quickly, and then we. Yes.
So I think he has partly answered my question, but I'm trying to ask. I wanted to ask about the UN since you've been there before, their role at the international body. But the other way around, what can we do for ourselves? I mean, especially sometimes I see calls from young people, and you realize that it's almost like it's going to be, there's no hope. We probably we should be optimistic, but when we are real, we look down and we realize like there is a serious problem because these people, they have children, they have kids, they are and also training a new generation that are technologically equipped and all that. So they are not longer going to depend on guns and all that. They are also scientific and all the rest of them. What do we do to help ourselves educate more people? And then talking about, he raised this issue. I'm also asking this issue of tribes, ethnic groups. Can't we do away with ethnic groups in Africa? We look at tribes, ethnic groups, by party, and next week we're going to family basis and all the rest, and we'll continue killing ourselves. I don't know.
Even when you don't have tribes, you can still. I went to Somalia and they fight on crime.
Mine have two comments on your answers. One, you seem to be skeptical on technology.
On what?
On technology.
No.
But what I'm saying is you can totally eliminate human beings in the election management. You can have robots do it. And you can have safety, built into them so that they cannot be manipulated. You have robots running hospitals, for example, giving medicine, going on elevators, giving medicine to individual rooms, so that robots can really run elections. That's one. And second, on your answer of the legitimacy of the UN and so on, suppose you have a treaty between a legitimate head of state and an illegitimate head of state. Would that stand in a court of law, whatever treaty they come up with, because he's doing it against an illegitimate head of state? The people have no say. So how could that stand in a court of law? How could that be between two states?
So,
let me take those ones quickly.
take these
Very quickly.
and then
Yeah.
Quickly, and then it will be the last three.
If I start with the professor, because he was very patient, and on the last part about the treaty, international law does not recognize governments. It recognizes states. So if you have a legitimate government, say like the legitimate government of South Africa, signing a treaty with DR Congo, which is a illegitimate Kabila, the treaty holds because it is DR Congo and South Africa making the treaty. So it's not about, so it doesn't matter who's there. So that's how the international law, I think, deliberately actually deals with the question of legitimacy.
But it's a practical factor, because if actually states were able to get out, you could abandon all the.
Yeah, I mean, but there has been, but even then, actually, in all honesty as well, I mean, there's all there is practical because again, I mean, it's one of the things that, for example, East Africa has had this long debate about the treaties signed around the Nile between Egypt and the UK, representing Uganda and Kenya, and then Ethiopia was also there. Then there's a whole question: can the treaty signed by the UK before independence bind the independent government? International law says yes, you can. But that said, there's also the ruling in the UK about the Mau Mau, for those of you who know the Mau Mau freedom fighters, who filed a case in London. And one of the arguments the British government was saying is that because after independence, the independent Kenyan government took over those responsibilities, and therefore the Kenyan government should be the one paying for the mistakes of the British government in torturing people. And the court said, no, sorry, it cannot be. It cannot be. You have to do it. So there is still a bit of debate on international law. On the technology, the robots, look, I think we have been working around this issue for so long, Professor. If there's somebody who can tell me this robot works and this robot is not going to be controlled by Kenyatta, I will agree. I will agree. Because ultimately it's who's got that software and controlling it, who's going to hack it. That's also the thing, because now I know people can hack even from Russia. They can hack and make a result that they want. So you've got to be, so technology is a good, what I was saying is that technology, we can't run away from the fact that technology is going to be with us, robots will be with us. So we're already having wars with robots. Those drones are basically robots that are fighting, and so wars are being fought without human beings in the front line anymore. So it's gonna come there. But so the question always is whether we can create hack-proof or systems that are not under control of one person who's going to determine it. But I think it's going to happen. Now, going back, I think the question about why do people vote regardless of outcome? They don't vote. They don't vote because they like voting. They don't go and queue for 5 hours because you like queuing. You vote because you believe this time, it will be true. It will be fair. That's the language politicians use. Don't worry, we have done it all. We have covered every base. This time there's no stealing. They haven't. They haven't done a thing. They have big mouths doing nothing. But then they continue. So people get hope. So there's a whole sense of raising people's hopes every 4 or 5 years, and then they're dashed. And people say, in fact, every single time in Kenya, say, I'll never vote again. But when it comes close to it, and I'm going to vote because this time I know. This time. So there's a hope. Elections are about hope. They're really about hope. So if you can work on that, you'll get people out there. On the role of the UN, it's a question about what can we do ourselves, right? It's a question you asked. Education has to be the key. We have to keep educating our people as much as we can. We've got to keep exposing our people as much as we can. And to be honest, the whole thing of tribes, as Professor said, Somalia is one tribe, but they fight because they go into clans, and then you learn they even sub-clans, then there are sub-clans, and they're fighting. It's incredible. So the human beings self-identify. We identify, and so we can't run away from the fact that people have identified themselves in certain ways. And the tribe is the way we have identified ourselves. And that tribe is an important part of who we think of individually, who we are. So we're not going to run away from it any time soon. Maybe at some point it'll become less and less important. The way perhaps you have seen religion is less and less important in certain parts of the West, which is, they used to say that when you're a rich country, when you become a rich country, you don't have as much need for God as others. But then America defies that idea. So I don't know where it is. So America, even if people are rich, are still. So I don't know where the answer is. But people, it's an identity issue, and we all identify ourselves in the way we want to do it. So I don't think I don't think tribes will go away in Africa. Not in your lifetime, not in your children's lifetimes. It will be there. So the question is, how do you then manage it? Yeah.
So much role in the affair of the nation.
Yeah, but we can't run away from it. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. I think many times whenever people pretend the tribe doesn't exist, it is very strong. If any nation says we are Ghanaians, there's tribalism there going on. I can assure you. Whenever I say we are this, and I've seen it in Rwanda, for example, where they say we have no tribe in Rwanda. Everybody here is Rwanda. Until you go now, then first they look at you and they say, so you are not from here? You're not from here? They ask you a few times. And then you go into a corner and then you hear stuff. Because there's a community called the Hutu who are feeling very, very pained by what's going on. They'll never say it in public. They'll never say it. But it's happening. It's a fact as it goes. So that's one. So the whole thing about big tribes, small tribes, how we should do that, I don't know whether there's an answer, to be honest. I think the Nigerians have tried this informal arrangement of moving it from north to south and east and west, and it seems to be functioning in some form, but it's everybody's turn to eat rather than move forward. But at least there's a sense. But at least Nigerians feel they have a chance at the presidency because of that arrangement. What you have in Kenya is a sense that unless you're Kikuyu or Kalenjin, it'll never come to your side. It'll never come. So that creates more and more animosity. So maybe it's something to try, maybe not. I don't know what. I don't think there's any answer. On the question, madam, you asked about elections or freedom or economic. Ethiopia was trying that model of development first and then see. Now look at Ethiopia. Look at people came out on the streets, It's shaken the country dramatically, and there's been a change forced by the optimistic view, by people coming on the streets and saying we can't accept this anymore. Africa is not the only continent that produces oil. We're not the only ones. Yet we are one of the few continents where our oil goes to benefit a few people. Norway discovered oil, I think, late 70s, and then began exporting in 80s. It didn't steal it. In fact, they've managed that oil very cleverly. You know why? Because they had a democracy in place. They had freedom in place. They had structures and systems in place. And they had real national dialogue about what to do with that oil. So clever. I mean, you got to give them credit for this. They decided that the oil has been discovered in our lifetime, but it's not ours alone. It's also for the generations to come ahead of us. So we have an obligation to make sure that the future generations also enjoy the benefits of this oil. So they don't use the money. They keep it in banks and move to all these funds and investment, wealth fund. And so they've done something. But I can assure you, as we saw in Nigeria, which found oil a little bit before Norway, where is that oil now? Where is that oil? You think that oil of Uganda will go to benefit poor people in the name of development first? So there's no. So I'm just basically, and actually, if you trace the history of Europe, you'll find that a lot of these countries had a modicum of democracy and structures and institutions that had checks and balances going. So as they got richer, they were able then to make into them. And I'm avoiding UK for that. UK is special. UK had a lot of blood. They killed it like no one's business. So you remove the UK and France a bit, but the most of Central Europe had a real sense of some structure. And so there's that debate has gone on what comes first, because a lot of that is driven by the China approach, where China has said that let us develop first. Once we're developed, we'll see. People talk about the East Asian tigers, whether that's been successful or not, and we're still seeing it's still out. It's not, the answer is not there. But we have to keep asking ourselves as Africans. We tried that approach at independence. We tried it and failed miserably. Professor Dula will tell you Zambia has collapsed, was almost on the verge of death, trying to be development first without freedom. They almost died. They were hungry. And didn't work. So I am, as an African, I know my own situation. I know that if we start saying, forget about multipartyism, forget about elections, forget about democracy and freedoms, let's focus on development, we're finished. We'll just come. All of us will just take boats to come to America. It's finished. It's finished. I can assure you it's finished.
So, listen, really pressing question.
Just a comment on the recent
real
Malian election and the election violence there in Mali.
I have no answer. I don't know. I won't pretend.
I think the other thing, just one last comment about the election, is that the election thing, I mean, provides a lot of this opportunity to be corrupt because it's a gigantic
enterprise. Yeah.
When you're running elections, it's huge. You have thousands of people to run the system, and unfortunately, we all look at it as a short-term thing.
Mm-hmm.
The only full-time people are like the electoral commission. So all the other people are recruited within weeks of election, very badly trained and all sorts of things. Just really very fatal for all kinds of games going on, corruption and all that sort of thing. And no one takes elections like a continuing process that you need to care for. If you look at Uganda, look at Kenya, the bulk of the electoral officers will be recruited 2-3 weeks before the election.
Can I say just one quick thing on Mali? Because I'm not sure what the question I had in mind, but Mali was also one of those countries which was really, in terms of institutionalizing, moving forward until the Islamists came in, partly connected, of course, with the Libyan intervention. So again, Mali and Niger, my sense is that another case where things were pretty moving in the right direction. I think if you do some research, I don't know if that's what you had in mind, but and in fact, one of those tragic cases where the problems from outside.
The Libyan.
Yes, a lot of these Islamists coming in. No?
There are problems inside Mali too, particularly with the Tuareg population. They had already had their movements even before the Libyans came in.
But they're under control, they have been contained, and then all these weapons coming from Libya.
Obviously, they haven't been satisfied.
You have to resolve their issues. Yeah. So I think really we've had a great presentation and great time with you. So please join me in thanking us.